Welcome to Top of Mind, the show where real estate industry insiders talk shop about the big trends shaping the market today. Enjoy the show.
All right, Mike Simonsen here. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the Top of Mind podcast. This is where I talk to the smartest leaders, thinkers, doers in the real estate industry. This episode is brought to you by Altos Research because that's what we do. Each week at Altos Research, we track every home for sale in the country, all the pricing, all the supply and demand, and all the changes in that data, and we make it available to you before you see it in the traditional channels. So visit altosresearch.com for more on how we do work at Altos. For a couple of years now, we've been sharing the latest market data every week in our weekly video series. With the new Top of Mind podcast, we're looking to add some context to the discussion about what's actually happening and do that with a conversation with leaders in the industry. So, speaking of leaders in the industry, I am thrilled to announce today my guest, Ralph McLaughlin. Ralph is the Chief Economist at Kukun and has more than a decade of experience in real estate analytics and development. He has held roles as Chief Economist at Trulia and Deputy Chief Economist at CoreLogic. He currently serves as Adjunct Assistant Professor at the University of Southern California and is a Advisory Chief Economist at Haus, H-A-U-S, which is also an Altos client. So, welcome, Ralph.
Mike, thank you. Great to be with you. And I'm humbled to be one of the first guests on your new podcast.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Okay, let's start off. You are you're the chief economist at Kukun. Tell us about Kukun, Kukun. But the sounds obviously like a real estate play. So tell us about what you're doing there and what we should pay attention to.
Yeah, well, I'm heading up the economics analytics team at Kukun. Got a team of very, very smart folks that come from many different backgrounds. Actually, got a few persons from Zillow Group, ex folks who worked at Zillow, a few that worked at Freddie Mac, and some that worked at Fannie Mae. So I've been very fortunate to assemble a crack team at Kukun. And one of the real differentiators at Kukun is the data assets that we have. We have most building permits in the U.S. And the reason that matters is that in the real estate analytics space, one of the big wild cards, as you know, looking at real estate data, is actual property condition. You can come up with an estimate of the value of the home. You can come up with what you think it will sell for, so on and so forth. But one of the things that's real difficult is to know, well, especially on older homes, has that homeowner been keeping that home in good shape? Have they made repairs? Have they replaced things like water heaters? Have they replaced a new roof? And so we're trying to be on the cutting edge of real estate analytics by solving this gap that's existed for a long time. About the only persons that have had this information have been appraisers, and that information typically isn't available in mass. Well, we've been able to find a great source of building permits for most jurisdictions in the U.S. I think we've just collected our 2,500 jurisdiction, and so we're trying to disrupt the space by bringing that information into the mix.
So fascinating. So what you're saying is like the old Zillow can't smell the cat problem. You can't. It's hard to estimate the price of a home based on comps if you don't have any idea that the kitchen's been redone or all kinds of things. And you can have a little bit of subjective things. People, a homeowner can put in some data, but really Kukun's using building permit data to go reapply all that. And is coming out is ultimately valuation. Like, how much is this house worth? Is that the question that the company's answering?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a few things that we're trying to answer. Primarily, number one is what is this house worth? Can we build an AVM that actually incorporates this information? And we just got our initial test results back on 5 counties from a testing company called AVM Metrics, and we are basically at the very top of 26 commercial grade AVMs when it comes to our median error or our median absolute error, which is a typical metric, and punching number 2, number 3, and from just putting building permits in an AVM model. It's amazing how much that's added to that mix. There are other products that we're working, other analytics products. So we're working on a home price index and be like, yeah, great, another home price index. Who needs another home price index, right? Everyone's got one. You got one, I got one, But one of the things that we can do with this building permit information is we can actually separate out market appreciation from capital improvement. That's one thing that almost all home price indices aren't taking into account. They're attributing everything to market appreciation when we know not everything is market-based appreciation. And especially in this housing market over the last year to year and a half, when there's been so few homes on the market, what have people done? Well, they've renovated their house. And so there's a lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but we think there's substantial mismeasurement in home price growth attributed to market conditions when actually it's a mix of market conditions and actual capital improvement. For example, we just rolled out a HPI for Phoenix, well, not publicly available yet, but internally. And we're estimating now, I think Case-Shiller shows 24% price growth in Phoenix. We're showing about 18% price growth. So 6 percentage points of that, almost a full quarter, is actually attributed to people adding value to their house and making investments, not from market fundamentals, supply and demand.
Appreciation. That's fascinating. So yeah, the quality of the stock is always a fascinating question, and the shift of what are we measuring in there. So what does that mean then for say the end either home buyer or the realtor? Like, what does that like? When Kukun makes this data available, what does that mean for them? How do they help the end buyer better? Yeah.
Yep. That's a great point. So a third product that I didn't mention, but you set me up, Mike. This is perfect. This is not even scripted. You set me up perfectly. Is we're working on an ROI model, which is we can use information on the work that's being done on homes to estimate the additional value add of doing a project. We do have a big network of contractors, so we can get a rough guess as to what it costs to actually do that work. And then we can present to either someone who's thinking about selling their house, is it worth it? Should I actually do this work before I sell my house? And also to buyers to say, oh, maybe you're going to buy a house that needs some work done. How much should I discount based on the additional value I would get versus what it's going to cost? So that is that consumer component, that end user component that we're really shooting for. Of course, AVMs have value, right? People use AVMs, but this is something that's very actionable, very much related to what we've been seeing, which is an increasing trend of people of renovating and improving the quality of the housing stuff.
That's great. So you think you can? I just redid my kitchen in my mountain home this summer, and you think that we now have visibility on like what that adds to the end value of the home?
Yeah, I mean, we have so there are some caveats here, and we're working through these caveats, but ultimately not everything not all work that's being done to a home needs a permit. So that's like kind of one drawback, but we've got some tricks up our sleeve about how to solve that. The least of which is, oftentimes when people are getting permits to do something on a house, they're also doing other work. And so, that's a little tease about how we can figure that out. But yeah, I pretty much, so for example, we got about a year ago, we did a solar roof on our house here because PG&E cuts the power off quite a bit. Living in the mountains, that happens. And just say we had a neighbor with an identical property, but didn't put that roof on their home. We actually can see. In fact, I've gone through our permit database and I've seen the permit there for us to get this roof done. And so we would know this house has had a new roof. The house next door that's identical didn't. And we would be able to do that differential using broader analytics about how much more homes with solar features sell for homes that don't have solar features. Now, when it comes to things like a kitchen, sometimes kitchen requires permits, sometimes they don't. So at this point in time, if there was work done that didn't have a permit, we might not be able to get at that, but we're still progressing, right? We're pushing past what is currently being done and not letting perfect get in the way of the good.
Right, for sure. Lots of information to be had there, and a lot of home buyer questions too. I know, it's funny. I don't know if you've ever heard, but the story of why I started Altos Research. I bought my little old piece of shit Silicon Valley house, for when I was 30, and you have this giant mortgage, and I bought it was 2001. It's with two bubbles ago. And I had, we knew we were buying the cheapest house in the expensive neighborhood. And one of the things that we assumed that we would do would be investing, add square footage. It was a 50-year-old house at the time, and we were going to add square footage, and how much value could we get out of that? And one of the things that I did was, this is why Altos Research, why we look at every market in the country in 4 price range quartiles. The bottom of the market may be behaving very differently from the high end. And also you'll notice in a place like Los Altos, the bottom, the cheapest part of that neighborhood, those were all quarter-acre lots. And you could get a little more expensive. But if you go much more, now you have half-acre lots. You can't trade up that high up the stack. And so, but I could see very clearly that investment was going to pay off. Like we could go move up, the next price range in that neighborhood and get the payoff. And that's exactly what we did. And I did it because I was sitting there watching that data that way.
Yeah, and what we're doing, I mean, so like you're an expert in housing space, of course, and so you get that, and even then, it probably wasn't a trivial exercise for you to do that, right? I mean, you had to sit down and kind of look at a lot of things, and so we think there is real demand for non-expert folks for that type of knowledge, right? And it's not just information; it's knowledge. It's taking that extra step. You can have a lot of data and know nothing about the data. So we're trying to produce knowledge from that data to help folks who maybe aren't experts like yourself. And I remember doing a similar thing in San Jose when I moved back from overseas in 2012. Bought a house. Bought it for 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 900 square feet by San Jose State University for $270,000, and that was like for us when I was young, breaking the bank, and just having enough left over to do some renovations, and even then it was just a real whirlwind. And again, I was a practicing housing economist at the time, and even so we're really trying to democratize that information and turn it into knowledge and help the next generation of first-time home buyers, well, anyone for that matter, but especially less knowledgeable first-time home buyers do exactly what you and I did, and help them grow equity in their house, not just through buying and waiting for market appreciation, but making smart investments in their home.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So that's really amazing. That'll be fun to watch the work that Kukun does, and Kukun is KUKUN for people who are listening, and that'll be really cool to see how that materializes as that product becomes available. Let's talk for a second about Haus, Haus, which is where we started working together, and where you are the I guess consulting chief economist, and you built some really interesting stuff at Haus. Tell me quick about Haus, and then let's talk about the work you did there.
Yeah, so Haus is an alternative home finance company where we actually partner with home buyers instead of put them into debt. So if you wanted to buy a house in the U.S. at any point over the last 60, 70, 80 years, you had to get a mortgage. You had to pay cash for it, or you had to get a mortgage and go into debt and all that. And so you're basically pigeonholed. Now, maybe you got some different kinds of mortgages you could get, but like the mostly work the same, right? Our product is we actually will purchase a home or co-invest in a home with a home buyer, where they will actually be on title. So we don't own the home, but we are we have a lien that's equal to the share that we put down on the property, and it allows people to own in a flexible way. And one of the advantages is that we can offer payments that are even cheaper than what you'd be able to rent that house for. So incredibly low payments. So we're talking considerably less than a mortgage. And we also offer the flexibility of cashing in and out every month if you need some extra cash or you want to buy more equity in that house. That's an option. And then third, we allow people to make payments, their monthly payments, with the equity in their home should they run into a financial hardship. So say, for example, you were partnering with us and you lost your job. Maybe it was because of COVID related or whatever reason. Pretty quickly, in normal times, pretty quickly, you would start to enter in foreclosure. Usually it's about 90 days to start to become seriously delinquent. And then the bank starts to come after you, the lender comes after you, and you start going through the foreclosure process. It's in no one's best interest to foreclose as long as the property is basically in good condition. And even if it's still going up in value, someone might want to stay in that house so they get back on their feet. So what we will do is we will say, okay, you don't have to make your payments, until you get back on your feet. And you can just make payments with the equity that you have in that house. And oftentimes it comes down to a fraction of a percentage of that, of the equity that they have. So if someone, let's just say, starts off with 15% equity in their house and we have 85, every monthly payment would be like 0.2 of a percentage point. So, you could say that it's not like they're giving up a whole lot of equity, but it means a lot to that person. Of all the stresses of being unemployed and trying to find another job, entering foreclosure is just, kind of a salt in the wound. And we offer a product that basically eliminates that risk.
That's fascinating. Okay. So there's so much going on in the alternative home financing world right now. There's all the rent to own and the cash buyer stuff and like all kinds of crazy things going on. Like some of me says like it's remarkable, and a lot of it started with Open Door doing the iBuyers. Like we have infinitely free money, so we'll buy your house. And and all of a sudden they could buy a house real quickly and turn around and then hold it for a little bit and sell it, and then a lot of the derivatives have happened since then. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to buy a house, but if you can't sell your house, we'll buy that one real quick, and we'll do all these other things. How do you see that landscape, and what do you think? And what do you think about the future of that? What's going on there?
Well, it's certainly, I wouldn't quite say it's the Wild West, but there's certainly a lot of innovation happening. And innovation, when you get big spurts of innovation, not everyone or not all companies tend to hang around, and not all business models tend to hang around. But overall, usually the industry is better off after that burst of innovation. I think that's what we're seeing. Now. I know, certain iBuying, I don't think is going away despite Zillow's departure from it. I don't think iBuying is going away. That's a value add service, especially for folks that might be in a crunch. Like say for example, if you got a job, at the end of this year, right? Maybe you were just offered a job last month and you start, sometime in the next couple of weeks and you have to relocate. Now's the worst, this better than I do. Now's the worst time to sell a house, right? And, if you're trying to buy another house in your future destination, it could be a real pain in the ass. This solves a lot of that problem, right? It solves the liquidity problem, especially for folks that are moving, between metropolitan areas. So I think that model is here to stay, whether or not, Open Door or OfferPad or even Zillow comes back in. Who's going to dominate? I don't know. Open Doors definitely seems to be, the leading player in the space. But yeah, again, a lot of it also comes down to being smart and using analytics wisely, I must say, in order to make that business model happen. On some of the other fronts, there's still there's an equity share, and that's what House plays in, right? But equity share is not equity share, right? There are varying degrees. For example, there's another company out there called Points, and basically you can trade some of your equity for some cash. and you actually don't have to make any payments. But there are some differences, right? Where they will actually bake in some buffer, so it's not just the cash that you're getting, but they bake in automatically some buffer on top of that, where they're guaranteed to make some money if you sell or if you buy them back in a year or two. That is growing. I think there is a permanent future there. I'd like to think it's the type of product that we have at House, but being a little bit humble, it's really tough to tell. The downside of this equity sharing arrangement, it just really started to get going. Maybe about a year or two before the pandemic. Point had been around for quite a while, but House, we launched our product about a year before the pandemic. One of the trade-offs of that is, of course, that home prices now have grown just incredibly, right? And being perfectly honest, they've grown incredibly, so much so that they've grown the fastest they've ever had in history per our records. And that actually, makes an equity sharing product look not super attractive for buyers that are all about home price appreciation, right? Like if you buy a house because you're thinking it's going to go up in value, be very clear, the equity products are not for you. And this is coming from someone, from a company, who we want to. If you're all about equity and growing as much as you can, we're probably not the product for you. So, but I have to be very clear and honest when I talk with potential customers and clients that, look, one of the big mistakes economists or anyone for that matter make is that they look at what happened in the recent past and they try to apply that to the future and they expect it, right? And sometimes you're going to be right, but when you're not always going to be right.
Well, that's right. So like Americans invest, like, I have this hypothesis that Americans have such a housing fetish compared to much of the world, partly because we don't have another safety net. Since there's no other social safety net, like it's sort of I got my house, and because in the U.S. we finance home ownership, we all the legislation is not finance, is in favor of home ownership. We deduct mortgage interest and all the tax laws, like all the things are about helping the homeowner own. That which is one of the reasons we have low inventory, and therefore, like we bank so much of our financial future on the house, the equity gains of the house. It's a fascinating challenge. Like the only time I want to give you equity in my house is when the market's tanking. Right. So it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out for folks.
And I think there's a nice middle ground here, actually, where the target client, the target market might be the pre-owner.
Okay.
And that is someone maybe who's ready to not rent anymore, but maybe not quite ready to buy. And this is an opportunity where they can still grow their equity share in a flexible way. Maybe they're young and don't want to ask their landlord to nail pictures on the walls or whatever, but not quite. They quite haven't found like their forever house that they could go with us, grow their equity, and use it as a leg up into maybe of a more traditional homeownership type of model. We're actually seeing those folks as being more popular with those folks.
And that's really interesting. That's there are applications there for an innovative buyer, somebody who's like it can, especially in a world where it's actually, if we have restricted inventory for the foreseeable future, like what's the best way for me to get into this market, into a home that I want to be in and build equity, start to build some equity. Like that's an interesting application. It is encouraging, I think, to have that kind of innovation happening.
And another benefit along those lines that I haven't quite mentioned yet, but is also important, is because our payments are so low. Yes, you may be giving up some equity and growth in that equity, but because our payments are so low, it is actually allowing households to buy more house. They can potentially get into better neighborhoods than they might not otherwise get into because their payments are so low. So if you look at the equivalent house you could buy with a mortgage versus us, you could buy a much more expensive house with us. The trade-off, of course, is equity and the growth in that equity over time. But your equity is still growing. It's just not growing as much as it would under mortgage. But the trade-off is you could probably live in a much better school district if you've got young kids, right? And so we think there's actually some overall community benefits, some well-being that would be created by this product, because it actually opens up opportunities for households that might not have had those opportunities before. Not just home ownership, but actual where you live matters a lot. I mean, the Raj Chetty at Stanford did a ton of great work that places everything when it comes to growing up and being able to be socially mobile. So if our product is actually allowing households to live in better neighborhoods, and maybe neighborhoods that they would have been locked out of because of their price maximums, we kind of unlock that a little bit.
That's interesting.
And so that's another type of persona that really might benefit from our product.
That's great. And one more question on this topic, and then let's move on to some, we got lots to cover. What happened? Does it become more appealing in a rising interest rate environment? So if we finally get out of this under sub 3 mortgage rates, let's say rates go to 4% or 4.5%. Mortgage payments start climbing significantly for a first-time home buyer thinking about getting into that good neighborhood. Does the deal in this shared equity structure from house, does that get better? Does it feel better at that point?
Yeah, it feels better for two reasons. One is going to be that, of course, the differential between our monthly payment, which we call an option fee because it's basically an option contract, and an equivalent type of mortgage, that delta, that gap grows, right? It really
so it actually gets cheaper each month. It's like the payment difference is bigger.
Exactly. And what also tends to happen when interest rates rise is that you actually get sort of a moderation in home price growth. So it actually means you would be giving up a little less as far as you're not giving up the equity that you put into the house, but of the home price appreciation.
The future growth.
Yeah, future growth, you're giving up a little less because when interest rates rise, you tend to get prices that price growth that moderates, and say drop. In extreme cases, it drops. And most of the time, it just moderates a little bit. We saw that at the end of 2018.
Fascinating. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. While at House, you created the CHPI, the Common Haus Price Index. Tell us about it and why the world needed it.
Well, I got to first, before we go into that, thank you, Mike. I mean, Altos data has been just absolutely key in helping the CHPI get off the ground and continue to do what it's doing. So I will. So I'll start with this. So there are a lot of great home price indices out there. You got a number of them, right? You've got the Case-Shiller index, probably the most famous one. You have the CoreLogic Home Price Index. You've got the Zillow HVI. You've got the FHFA Home Price Index. Those are all great, good, solid indices. The thing that's not great about them is this. One, they're usually pretty heavily lagged. I mean, Case-Shiller is lagged by, I think we had the release last week. That was reporting for July, August, and September, or maybe is September. August.
Not just September. Just September.
Just September.
It's December.
July, August, December. I know it's December, and we're getting July, August, and September data, right? That's what it's based on. So it's a great index. It's very well, Robert Shiller, hero of mine, right? But it's lagged. It's lagged. So that's one issue. The second is that it's an index. So for a lot of just your average consumers, they don't really know what the hell an index means, right? I mean, an index of 156.345 doesn't really mean a whole lot. Yeah, that gets translated into percentage year over year, but it doesn't really kind of mean a lot. So those are a couple of things that really weren't so great about these indices. And during a time when the market is going through an inflection point, that lag can actually, be the difference between making smart decisions or making actually poor decisions when it comes to anything in the housing market. So what we've done with the Chippy is we actually take this awesome feed that Altos has that comes in every week, all the listings on the market and characteristics of those properties. And we feed it into a new home price index that is not for the average house. It's not a meaningless index 156.35. It's not for a median home. We actually look at the most commonly specified house in the US, which is actually a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house on basically a quarter-acre lot that's 1,250 square feet, or they're about, 1,500 square feet. And we basically say, what would that house cost nationally and in every single market? And then we peg the index to that house and what that house would cost over time.
It's like the Big Mac index, around the world. How much does a Big Mac cost in dollars?
That means a hell of a lot more to your average consumer of this information than it does the CPI, right? The CPI less shelter, or the CPI, for urban consumer. I mean, your average person doesn't know what the hell that means, right? So we wanted to actually make a very accessible home price indices and make it more contemporary, more current. So we do that, so what it is, what we're estimating the value of the house for, and it's standardized. And then we're also telling you what happened last week, not what happened 3 months ago. And again, this is where Altos has really come in, because it's allowed us to be very, very current in our estimates. And thus far, I've been producing it now publicly for about a year and 3 months. And I didn't, I was releasing at a time the housing market was just going crazy. And I just thought, oh shit. Well, here we go. It's going to be a ride. It's either going to be pretty good and it's going to be a leading indicator, or it's going to flop and, my credibility's out the window. And again, it would be based on my methodology, not on your data. The Altos data is great. And, I was really nervous the first 3, 4, 5 months, because our index was just starting to skyrocket. It was starting to show prices going up 14, 15, 16, 17, 18%. And Case-Shiller was reporting like 8% or 7%. And I was just like, well, okay, I'm going to ride this thing out, but I may have to go underground for a few years, to come back up.
It's funny. I've had there are maybe 3 times in the history of the company Altos Research, which I started in 2006, to be, when you get to be contrarian and bullish at the same time. So when the market when everybody thinks it's cratering, and you look around, you go, guys, it's going up. That combination is a really fun time to do it. And I remember in the Altos data bottomed in February of 2010, which was the exact same time that the S&P bottomed. But because there was the first time homebuyer tax credit, it pulled all this data forward, and we were sitting there and we're looking, we're like it's like the market's up and the tax credit's now gone, April of 2010. And we could see, I remember I was at like a BlackRock or somebody on Wall Street, and they're looking around, they're saying, you're the only people in the world who are bullish on U.S. housing right now. Yeah.
And that was a good year before, the big, more bullish investors really started to get in the game. So, talking about leading indicators, certainly as a lot of the work that we're doing with Chippy is, inspired by, a lot of the work that you guys were doing, just reporting and making this information, as available as you can make it, and still have it be a business, right? Which is
cool.
Great. And
so the question is, so what do you see now, and what do you see for 2022?
Yeah, well, I think you and I see eye to eye in a lot of things. Not for the sake of seeing eye to eye, but I think because we look at these data in very, very similar ways, which is the way at least most economists and analysts need to look at these data. the big thing I'm seeing now, of course, is that home price growth on a year-over-year basis is starting to cool down. We are now down. Tomorrow we'll release the CHPI, although tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, December 7th for for those in the future. This will be in the past, where home price growth is down to about 6.5%. It peaked, at least according to Keith Schiller, at around 20% year over year back in I think it was June or July's release. So our indicators are showing that home price growth year over year is coming down. So we certainly see some cooling at the end of this year. The big wild card, of course, is inventory. And you've done a great job online every week showing what's happening with inventory. And it's just, I don't think anyone could have predicted it. And it's the big wild card going forward that I don't think any of us really has a good crystal ball to know what's going to happen. It looked like at the end of this year, it was starting to recover, right? It was coming back. It was coming back. And then over the last basically month and a half, 2 months, it's just cratered again. And it's looking like it's cratered more. It'd be good to get your thoughts on this, but it's looking like, historically speaking, it's cratering more than it normally would crater during the off season. Like it seems to be more than just a seasonal effect.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah. So last December, the seasonal effect was gone. People just plowed all the way through December. And that took us by surprise. This one is not quite that nuts, but like it is still feels like demand is there. And because people have such cheap mortgages, they don't need to sell, even if they're buying another house. So there's still that trend. Sure seems to be happening. Sure seems to, as far as I can tell, look like we're going to be, beginning of the year with lower inventory than we started last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, it's just been an absolute chaos for buyers, right? And that's kind of what I tend to think in my mind. It's not been great for buyers. So even though price growth has come down, this time last year, prices had already started to really escalate. So it's not really, growth is moderated, but it's still, still incredibly higher than it was 2 years ago, right? But yeah, I mean, my hope from an inventory perspective was we hit a bottom that looked sometime around maybe April of last year, and then it started to come up, and now it's come back down again. My hope at that time was that we were going to have this slow, steady recovery in inventory that bucked the normal seasonal drop in inventory this year, that it was going to keep charging up, and that by the time we would hit the peak buying season of 2022, we would kind of be back to normalish numbers. And when I say normalish, I mean pre-COVID, not like historically normal. And we were still below.
We've been falling.
COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I mean, it's hard to imagine that actually is going to be the case. So it looks like it might be another very, very chaotic spring buying season, unless, of course, we suddenly get a bunch of pent-up inventory that comes onto the market. It's possible.
I guess. I don't know who that is.
I mean, it's gonna have to be either folks that really wanting to sell over the past 2 spring seasons and just got really freaked out by COVID. Maybe that's built up a little bit.
Sure, maybe.
But again, it would have to be a large amount. We're talking like almost double the amount of homes that we have in the market, and I don't know if that's going to be possible.
Yeah.
And the second would be those maybe that suffered economic financial injury and built up a lot of equity because home prices gone nuts, and are just going to want to sell rather than foreclose, right? But I looking at the folks that say Realty Track that study this stuff, it seems like it'd be potentially a pretty small amount. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's do this. We're plowing through our time together already. So we're in this multi-year low equity cycle, low inventory cycle. Inventory has been falling year over year. We start the year with fewer homes than we started the year before. Do you have view of A, like what might happen in the next 5 years, and B, like is there a way out of this crisis for buyers? We do all of our policy for owners. Is there anything we can do to help get out of this cycle to make it easier for buyers?
Yeah.
Any ideas about the future that way?
Yeah, great question. So you're right. I mean, absolutely. From a policy perspective, especially at the federal level, but also even down to state and sometimes the local governments, most of the quick reaction policies tend to be demand focused because it's easy. You just basically give people more money or find a way to make them pay less taxes or a combination of both. Right. That's easy, quick, and usually, it's somewhat effective.
Like generate demand, like first time home buyer tax credit, generate demand.
Go get them. Just go help them get into homes. Right.
Yep.
Which, I guess maybe as a politician, I can appreciate it. It seems like, you're actually doing something. And, there are people that have, at least short term, if not, long term benefits that come from that. But if all that's happening at a time when the market is suffering from a supply problem, you're really kicking the can down the road, right? You're not getting to the root of the problem. And to be frank, solving the supply problem is a very, very tough one, both politically, but also just mechanically, right? Because you're having to wait a long time. The supply doesn't happen instantly, especially new home building. That doesn't happen instantly, right? Also to convince people to sell their homes, that they're living in is also more difficult to do than it is to convince people to buy homes by giving them money, right? So I think there are a couple things that could happen. One, and I wrote about this earlier this year, and some people paid attention to it. I guess most people did not, but I'll share it here anyways. Is one thing that we have seen over the last year and a half has actually been a pretty, well, even the last 2, 3, 4 years, a pretty steady activity and involvement from investment companies, like people buying homes for investment purposes, whether it's mom and pop or whether it's institutional investors. This has actually gone on for probably longer than 3 or 4 years. It's been going on, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Those folks have a lot more equity in their homes, in their investments than they did before. If they were to sell, they would have to pay a significant amount of capital gains tax. Right?
Right.
So one way you might be able to get them to sell is to say, we will reduce your capital gains or eliminate it one time if you sell to an owner occupier.
Yep.
And that's a way to get some of the existing housing stock that's owned by investors into the hands of owner occupiers with some cost. So that should free up some inventory, right?
I like that a lot.
Free up some transaction. Not, depending on which side of the political spectrum, you may not be in favor of that. Right now, everyone favors, giving money to investors or letting them off the hook.
Right.
But
very few less respected characters than the landlord, right? Than the investor landlord. Nobody wants to give them breaks, right?
No one wants to hook them up, right? But
you get my mustache. I do my little handlebar mustache.
Your Monopoly hat, right? Your Monopoly hat, But even if you disagree with that approach, I mean, there's sort of an equally important approach that you could take on the other side that would probably have the same effect, which is, well, if you don't sell now to an owner occupier, we're going to raise your capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Or we're going to tax your rental income at a higher rate.
At a higher rate, yeah.
So depending on, the policies that I like to think of or come up with solutions, I just try to solve the problem. I don't try to think, well, who's going to like that or who isn't, but what do I think is going to solve the problem? These are things that I think would help solve the problem, and I'll let the policymakers fight over, whatever they think is going to be. But that, in my mind, that helps to start getting towards the root cause of the problem, which is getting more existing supply into the market. And of course, anything long run that we can do to help increase new home building also is going to help, especially with population growth, right? Those are going to be anything from like tax breaks to developers, to incentivizing local governments to rezone land to accommodate more new home building. So those
like some of the California stuff.
That's exactly right. And there's actually been some in the infrastructure plan that came out that actually was some promising stuff in there that was focused on incentivizing local governments to rezone land to build more homes. And
that's interesting.
I love that policy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're in this interesting mode with new construction where actually starts are the highest. They're finally back to a high level. Completions aren't high yet because of the whole global supply chain problem. Do you see, is there any chance that all of a sudden we get a flood of new homes that are going to change the dynamic?
I mean, relatively speaking, compared to the last couple of years, it's possible we get a flood of new homes. So, I wouldn't necessarily want to be, in that situation if I were a home builder. But taking my home builder hat on, we've been underbuilding for like 30 or 40 years. I mean, this isn't a new problem. We've been underbuilding in this country, and that's partially why home prices relative to income are now, close to as high as that they ever were. Interest rates are part of that story too. But still, we've been underbuilding in this country, underbuilding homes for a long, long time. So, I mean, I would have to think that even if there were a big flood of homes come out on the market, it wouldn't be anywhere near, say, 2005, 6, 7. I mean, home builders are not as reckless. There's not, as much just inflated demand out there in the lending, vis-a-vis loose lending. So I would think any realistic flood of homes now wouldn't be catastrophic for the market. It might not be what home builders would want, but those are tangible additions to the housing stock, which it desperately needs and has actually been needed for a long time. So I'm so much more concerned about having low inventory, both new and existing, that's such a dire problem that any potential risk on the other side of oversupply kind of negates it. It's not something that I would be sort of worried about, right? I am not worried about causing the housing market to crash, especially given we have a big demographic of millennials entering, kind of their middle age, and a young Gen Z that shows that they do want to buy homes.
Yeah. Do you have you done any work in thinking about how all of this plays out in an inflationary market? Like we've had no inflation for so long. What the hell happens if all of a sudden we're at 6, 7 more? If you listen to the Bitcoin crowd, it's even higher than that. Like, what if this plays out? What happens to the housing market in that space? In a scary inflation space, that all of a sudden the Fed's behind the curve and can't tame it fast enough.
Well, there's two opposing forces here that I'll talk about. I can't anticipate which one is going to play out, but I will tell you what a high inflationary environment might have on those forces, and thus what the impact might be on the housing market. So the obvious thing is that when you have a high inflationary environment, what can happen is you get rates that actually go up. And if mortgage rates go up, all else equal, that actually would tamp down demand for housing somewhat, right? So that's a possibility. The other side of the coin is that in an inflationary environment, housing, brick and mortar, looks very good from an investment standpoint as a hedge against inflation. Real estate has traditionally been an excellent hedge against inflation because rents tend to go up, at least with inflation, if not more, like we're seeing now. And home prices also tend to go up more than inflation.
And your debt's fixed in the old dollars.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's fixed in the old dollars. So it's one of those things where, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what would play out. I can tell you how I would want to see this play out as an economist. Is I would want the Fed to take still a very cautious approach with raising rates, because we don't want to crash the market now. I think a little bit of inflation or even moderate inflation is not a terrible thing, given we haven't had it in so long, right? It's kind of like we're overdue. We don't want it to have it happen all at once, but that the Fed or well, I said the Fed, but the federal government could also try to help work on inflation through other means that have nothing to do with the Federal Reserve changing rates. And that is, let's look at some of the supply chain issues and labor market issues that have been caused by the pandemic that are leading to inflation. Are there other policies that could be implemented that would help fix those and thus help reduce inflation without putting the Fed in a tight spot between like raising rates and getting inflation under control and potentially cooling the economy so much that we actually lose full employment, right? Or we rest away from full employment trajectory, which is what we're on. Again, I got to be very clear. This is coming from someone who's a microeconomist, not a macroeconomist. So it's not my area of forte. There's a lot of smarter people out there that study and talk about these things. But at least as someone who does pay attention to the housing market, does pay attention to inflation, that's kind of the outcome that I would I'd prefer to see.
Awesome. Okay, that's interesting. Are there risks that that you're thinking about that are out there? Like we're in the smoking hot real estate market. It sure looks like supply is going to stay low and demand is going to stay high. What derails the train?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the next 10 years, there's not a whole lot that's going to derail that train. I hope we get to a more normal looking market, where maybe we're in, mid to high level single digit price growth, and that we get inventory back to, maybe around 3 to 4 months supply. I know 6 months was the traditional normal, but I think the new normal is probably more, 2, 3, 4 months for a variety of reasons that have somewhat related to technology and ability to buy and sell homes, but also for other reasons. So I think I'm very bullish on that. It was in this 10, probably 15 years. Maybe this is too far out, of a forecast for your readers. The thing I'm most concerned with, and again, time will tell, and I'll be very, very old and very gray by then. But kind of around the year 2039, 2040, 2041, we really get to a point where household growth in the U.S., household formation starts to look flat or even negative, depending on your assumptions around things like immigration. Certainly, our birth rates now, our natural birth rates, are well below replacement levels, which means without immigration, we look like Scandinavia and we look like Japan. Yes. That can have real severe consequences for household formation. And the housing market is basically totally dependent on household formation. And so I'm really going to start paying attention to what our federal policies look like, and I have been paying attention, but really start to pay attention and maybe advocate certain ways, probably by 2030, 2031, a 10-year horizon. That's when policy discussions around immigration start to become very, very important for the housing market, and also for other producers of goods and services, and also for just general well-being of this country. I mean, we've always been a nation of immigrants. And there's some, aside from the economic benefits, there's some cultural benefits that we would lose if we aren't growing this country, at least partially through immigration. But at that point, we may not have no choice to grow this country, but purely through immigration. So again, maybe too far ahead in the future for a lot of your listeners, but something that I do think probably more about than I should, given it so far away.
That's a great point. A population growth, and we got the boomers dying off. We have the millennials hitting their peak home buying years. So we have a few years of millennial tailwind. But after that, if we haven't resumed immigration, could all of a sudden shift a bunch of assumptions about who buys, how many people buy, how many homes we need to build if we're actually declining in population. That could be like all kinds of assumptions would be changing at that point.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and so I mean, we'll say, and again, I'm not advocating any political side. I tend to be kind of down the middle when it comes to those things. But this is really, if you look at those that do demographic forecasting, I mean, most of the well-respected demographic forecasters, that's what they're forecasting around that time, and it's a matter of fact. I mean, it's if we want to grow this country and we want there to be more households, that's going to be about the only way we can do it, unless we just spike the water with libido enhancing drugs for decades to come.
Or tax credits.
For tax, that's right.
Tax
or tax credits.
Like in France, right?
Yeah, there's no libido better than
that's right.
better than a tax credit.
Exactly. So I'm watching the December sun set behind your face there. Let's bring us to a close. Is there anything we missed today? Like big things that we should be paying attention to? Cool trends, things that you see for the world?
I mean, the way that we all live and work is still something. What's changing, and we don't know what sort of the end state is, right? I mean, we went through just a very big restructuring with all of us, with how we live and work. And some people have not been affected, but there has been a lot of people that have been affected. And, we need to continue to pay attention to that and how that plays out spatially, what it means for things like agglomeration economies, right? And again, this is maybe, a little theoretical in some way, but basically, I mean, cities for a long time had been and still are for that matter, but were the engines of this country's economic prowess, right? And they continue to get more important and bigger and more productive. And now we've seen, that sort of disrupted in a way that, we are still having face-to-face interaction virtually, of course, but it's allowed people to do this in areas far away from one another. And so I'm very much continuing to look to see, okay, what are the hot markets, right? And we've seen some of the hot markets lately not be the hot markets that we had before COVID, right? That were the San Franciscos or the Denvers or the, LAs or whatnot. Really it's starting to go more in Sand Belt places, right? So Texas is, of course, a hot market. Florida has become a hot market. Phoenix just continues to be, on a tear. And so, I very much keeping my eye on those sorts of trends, how people live and work. And then, of course, there's all the technology about how people find and buy homes that's evolving. We had the disruption with the Zillows and the Trulies of the world, but that's probably not finished, right? There's probably going to be many things. So yeah, those are the things that, when I'm not sleeping well at night, that kind of
make us infinitely entertaining at cocktail parties, right?
Yeah. Only if they're attended by economists or CEOs of data analytics companies.
Yeah, a lot of fun. All right, Ralph, so much to talk about today. Really great. Thank you for being with us. Where can people find you? And we talked about Kukun and Haus. How about those?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to find me is actually to go to Twitter at Housing Ralph. And then from there, I've got links to a lot of the work that I do at Haus, which can be found at haus.com/resources. And we are still, we're getting our blog up and running at Kukun. So you'll start to see some pieces there show up in the next couple months.
Looking forward to seeing that work for sure. So Housing Ralph is the Twitter account. And tomorrow or Tuesdays, is when the Chippy comes out each week. Ralph, thank you so much. It's really been enjoyable talking to you, and we'll do it again.
Pleasure is Mike. Pleasure is mine, Mike. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next time.
All right. See you.
Bye. See you.
All right. So everyone, thank you so much for joining me. And that's all for the Top of Mind podcast for the week. And we'll see you more next week.
Thanks for listening to Top of Mind. See you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.